Hello, listeners. Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to Canadian Gothic, a series by the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Canadian Gothic, a nighttime series in which my pal Madelayne Klein and I discuss dark and unsettling Canadian stories. In prior episodes, the stories we covered have been chosen by Maddie and I. Usually it happens when something catches one of our eyes, or in some cases we use the show as an excuse to tell the other about a story that has interested us in the past. But this episode is something completely different. We're not choosing the stories tonight. We left that to an almost supernatural force that knows more than either of us could ever imagine knowing. Let me explain. Over the last few years, artificial intelligence has become a growing concern among society. Many artists feel that it's plagiarizing their work, writers feel it's devaluing theirs, and nearly everyone wonders how it will affect our future interactions with technology and with each other. Well, Madelayne and I wanted to see what the fuss was all about, and we figured collaborating with artificial intelligence is probably inevitable anyways, so why not give it a try now? What I did is I called upon ChatGPT, one of the leading artificial intelligence chatbots, and asked it a rather heavy question. Dear all-knowing artificial intelligence, what are the 5 most notorious Canadian crimes? The answer it gave led to a conversation that brought Madelayne and I through all sorts of different places. So I don't want to waste any more time setting this up. Let's get into it. In this episode of Nighttime Podcast, Madelayne Klein and I will begin discussing Canada's most notorious crimes, as decided by the ChatGPT artificial intelligence chatbot. Ms. Madelayne Klein, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How about you?
Things have been good. Life is back to normal here in Nova Scotia now that the majority of the wildfires have been extinguished.
Oh, good.
Good. That's a good thing. What's new with you? What have you been up to?
Well, I'm well rested. I slept for 11 hours last night. What? I know. I don't know. I was like, I'm going to go to bed, and I did. I crashed. We had like a wicked storm that I almost slept through. I woke up to like a couple big booms of thunder, but like it was pretty rank. Our underpass is flooded as always. But when I drove up to work this morning, there was a tree that either was struck by lightning or was down by the wind. I don't know, but it like almost crushed someone's house.
Oh.
So I was like, I was really out last night.
Yeah. So what kind of storm was it? Like just like wind and thunder and lightning and rain, like the whole works?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess my husband said it like downpoured for 2 hours.
Really?
Which never happens.
And you slept through. I'd be disappointed if I slept through. I love storms, especially if it has heavy rain.
Me too.
Do you go outside in them? Do you enjoy that?
Sometimes. Like I wish I had like a nice covered porch that I could sit on and really enjoy the storm, but it really depends which way the wind's going. It doesn't matter if you have a porch sometimes, but I'll watch them if I'm awake.
Yeah, I have rain gear. I don't mean going out in the porch. Like I go out on the street. I love to see where all the water is going and what's going on. I'll go with my feet and I'll unclog the manholes so the water drains. And my neighbors, I'm sure, think I'm a strange person. I'll just put it that way. Because whenever it starts raining, I'm outside like running around the streets in front of my house.
Your chances of getting hit by lightning are probably more than the average person.
Yeah. And I embrace it. I welcome it. That will give me superpowers. Do you not read comic books?
Oh, is that what happens?
I assume so. Same with spider bites. That's why I touch spiders whenever I see them.
I would chance a lightning bolt before a spider. They are gross.
Anyway, we got to move on because people are like shutting. I'm getting stats right now. People are unsubscribing, hitting pause, hitting stop. One person just shut off their phone altogether and reset it. Let's talk about some.
I can't blame them.
We got a lot to get into here. I didn't even introduce the topic yet, but before we do, I want to get to your take on some recent. I guess this will be true crime, Canadian true crime news. Are you a big fan of the show Law and Order?
Only SVU.
That's Special Victims Unit.
Yeah.
Okay, that's I
But
think it's weird that you only listen to that because isn't for correct me if I'm wrong, but Law and Order, the version I know is the one from like the 90s where every episode was generally like a murder that was being investigated and saw like the first half of the episode would be investigating the murder, the second half would be like the trial or something. But isn't SVU, Special Victims Unit, isn't the whole spin on that version of the show, it's not like a murder, isn't it generally like sexual assaults or children?
they're, yeah, particularly heinous crimes. So if you recall the intro,
Okay. Well, there's a new version of Law and Order coming that you may be interested in. I thought it was a joke when I first saw this being spread around on the internet, but the new version is simply titled Law and Order Toronto. Toronto is getting its own Law and Order adaptation. I'm going to read you a short thing here. In a press release issued Monday, City TV, which is owned by Rogers Media, announced the new crime drama dubbed Law and Order Toronto Criminal Intent. The show will consist of 10 one-hour episodes following an elite squad of detectives who investigate high-profile crime and corruption in Metro Toronto. With production set to begin this fall, the episodes will showcase original Canadian stories written, produced, and starring Canadians. Do you think this is the right move?
So original Canadian stories, does that mean they're making them up?
Well, usually, like Law and Order, for the most part, it's fiction, but it's kind of like loosely
Like loosely
based.
based.
Yeah. So, for example, I'm sure it's set in Toronto. There's probably going to be one about a guy who rents a van and drives into people. You know, like for as an example, like
Oh, yeah.
they'll probably maybe they won't be that on the nose, but they'll find like Canadian crimes or
Okay.
Toronto-based crimes and make episodes about it. It seems I'd be surprised if that's not what it is.
Right. Yeah, because when I first read about this, I originally thought they would be like copy and pasting real crimes and doing like a Law and Order on that. But no, this sounds much more plausible.
I think that's what it'll be. I think it's a weird choice, but I think
Well, they've got enough material.
certainly, yeah. But
As long
anyway,
as they keep the theme song, I think it'll be great.
dun 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 dun. Yeah, I love that tune.
Oh, who doesn't?
No, anyone,
It's like the
insane tune.
X-Files theme song.
Yeah, it's just it's so evocative. As soon as it dun 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 dun, once that happens, you're like, all right, crime.
Yeah, sit down.
Just like with X File, you're like aliens.
Yeah, exactly. And just yeah, it's you recognize it right away. So
But let's get into our talk here. We're not here to discuss Law and Order, June bugs, or our interest in weather. We're here to initially talk about ChatGPT and AI. Is this stuff new to you? Do you ever use it? Have you played with
uh,
ChatGPT?
I didn't know it existed until you told me about it, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's very very interesting, and it's weird that after the first time you told me about it, I started hearing about it everywhere. I was like, oh,
Yeah,
it's like the snowball effect.
just
But
became yeah, that became big news. But ChatGPT is, I guess, like the most popular of all the various artificial intelligence chatbots that exist on the internet. And what they do, I guess, a very basic way to explain it is ChatGPT, this computer program, will say, has scoured the internet, reading everything, collecting all the information, and compiling it and kind of learning from it. And because it knows so much, you can ask it questions and it can spit out some pretty intelligent answers. And not only will it give you answers in much similar as how like Google would, if you ask Google a question, you know, a Google search can kind of give you an answer. But what ChatGPT's artificial intelligence can do is it can also like write essays or predict language styles. So I could say, you know, tell me about the sinking of the Titanic in the style of a, you know, William Shakespeare book or something, and it'll use Old English when it tells me the story of the Titanic. That said, it's just pulling information from everywhere, so it's not always correct. It's sometimes it repeats itself and it's clunky, but it's also surprisingly good at moments. But the dark side of things like ChatGPT's AI is it could put people out of a job because I could say to like someone like yourself and me who are I guess something like a blogger, I could say, in 800 words, tell me the story of, the unsolved, murder, something, something. And it will basically write an essay that you could almost just like proofread it and edit it a little bit and publish it. Much like you see the programs that people use on Instagram and stuff where they're using prompts to make AI images, and animators and graphic designers are complaining that that's, stealing their work. So it's kind of a similar thing. But
I've also read just this one story that I read quite recently. It can take a job in the sense that it can get you fired too. Because I just read about a lawyer who used ChatGPT for something, and
oh man.
it cited 3 cases that don't exist.
Oh my God.
So I
Oh
thought that was pretty funny. So
yeah.
careful. Yeah.
Oh, I could see it. And there's a big debate about how kids are using it, especially like high school students, because it could.
Yeah.
I wish they had ChatGPT when I was in high school.
Oh,
I would have done awesome.
I was gonna say maybe I would have done better.
I would have had a bit more free time, only slightly more free time. Because I'll be honest, I didn't spend a ton of time doing hard work back then.
I was gonna say I had a ton of free time, but my schoolwork kind of,
Suffered
I
a
always
bit.
used to say C's get degrees, and they did.
Oh man. Well, tonight ChatGPT is going to take center stage because I asked it a question that I was interested to see what its answer would be. I was also interested in trying to understand its justification for the answer it gave. Because again, it is going to scour the internet to give its answer. And the question I asked it is, Dear ChatGPT artificial intelligence chatbot, what are the most notorious Canadian crimes? And ChatGPT only took a second to think about it. And then it spit out a list of 5 crimes with a couple different kind of like, I'll call them dishonorable mentions that it included. And I think it's a pretty compelling list. I showed you the list. You agreed somewhat that this would be a good top 5 or 5 of the most notorious Canadian crime cases. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to go through the 5 that ChatGPT gave us. We're also going to look at some others that it recommended for interesting reasons.
Sounds good to me.
Before we get into the list, I'm sure you probably had, when you think of the 5 most notorious or well-known Canadian crimes, the 5 that ChatGPT spit out, are they in line even somewhat with what you would have come up with?
Yeah, most of them were. There were a couple I was like, that would make the top 10 notorious list, but I also don't know everything, so.
Okay. Let's get into it here. The first case is one that I know very well, and listeners of my show will know this well. According to ChatGPT's artificial intelligence chatbot,
the 5th most notorious crime in Canadian history is the case of Alan Legere. Legere, known as the Monster of the Miramichi, was a serial killer and rapist who terrorized the Miramichi region of New Brunswick in the 1980s. He was convicted of multiple counts of murder and other crimes.
Listeners of my show will know him well because I've done 2 episodes, maybe more. I think I've done 2 episodes about Alan Legere, and followers of your videos will know as well because you did 1?
Yeah, just 1, and just recently too. So
Alan Legere,
this is one of the ones that didn't surprise me. It made the list.
The only reason it surprised me was because ChatGPT is looking through articles, newspapers, books that were published about it, documentaries, any kind of mentions of it online. In Alan Legere, I don't consider, of course, it's a high profile case, but if you think of Canadian crimes, it's not one that is the most discussed, I guess.
That's true.
But Alan Legere, for people who missed my episodes or your videos about it, he was a serial killer and rapist known for terrorizing the Miramichi area of New Brunswick at a period of time in the 80s. In the end, he was arrested and convicted of multiple murders and a variety of other crimes. One of the things that make his case historic and notable, other than just the brutality of what he's done, is it was the first instance of DNA being used to convict a criminal. I think I don't know about in the world, but at least in Canada, it was the first time DNA was used in evidence to get a conviction, which is pretty
Which is
interesting.
crazy because 1989 wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, exactly. But it's, man, a
Yeah.
lot has changed since 1989. Color TVs were just around then, weren't they? Probably no, color TVs were probably since the 70s. I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe even late 60s. Anyway.
But I'll kind of, maybe we'll go like story to story. I'm going to recap a bit of what Alan Leger did, and then we'll talk about maybe what would make this so notable. So Leger's story, again, I've done a multi-hour series on it, but the very quick version of the story is it starts June 21st of 86. Alan Leger and two accomplices, Todd Matchett and Scott Curtis, they rob a convenience store in Black River Bridge, New Brunswick. After they cut the power, the trio break into the store where they meet the owners, who is an elderly couple, John and Mary Glendenning. They proceeded to severely beat the couple, including a sexual assault against Mary. Mary lost consciousness during it, and when she regained consciousness, she found her husband, John Glendenning, dead in the house with her. She called 911, reported what happened. Within days, I think the trio were caught. All three were convicted, sentenced to prison. But this is where it gets interesting, is while in prison, Alan Leger was like the model prisoner. He was always on his best behavior, became friends with the guards. He was buddy with everybody, but it wasn't because he was a nice guy. It was because he was gaining their trust to eventually take advantage of it and betray them. He really pulls it off on March 3rd of 1989. I think he had been in prison for like a year or 2 years at this point. He intentionally gave himself an ear infection, and he did it by pouring urine that he collected. He was pouring it into his ear, and he was also, I heard, like leaving it in bottles in his cell so it would like start to ferment, pouring it in his ear as a way to get an ear infection so that he would need to be transported from the prison to a hospital for treatment. It worked. May 3rd of 1989, one guard transports Leger to a hospital in Moncton. While in the hospital, again, Leger takes advantage of the trust that he's gained by asking that guard, like, I got to duck into the bathroom. Is that okay? The guard allows him to do it. When Leger goes into the bathroom, he removes a TV antenna he had stolen from the television in the prison. He had inserted it into his rectum to sneak it out of the prison, to go into the bathroom, to remove it. And he's using it he's going to use it as a shank, a sharpened object. What he does is he removes his handcuffs while in the bathroom, has the TV antenna, and he basically just boots the door open and just starts running to get out of the hospital. He manages to escape. Once he's outside the hospital, he carjacks a vehicle and begins his 7 months of, I don't know what you would call it, 7 months of terror. Because what he ended up doing is just hiding out, for the most part, in the woods in and around Miramichi, which is the small community that he's from. And he'd leave the woods to break into homes, mainly preying on senior citizens, breaking into their homes at night, stealing food from their homes, but also sexually assaulting women, primarily senior citizens. It seemed like his thing was older ladies. He would steal them, or he would break into their homes at night, sexually assault them, and arson was a part of it. During his time on the run, he murdered Annie Flam and attacked her sister. He killed sisters Linda and Donna Dotney. He killed a priest, Father James Smith. And then he was eventually captured in a carjacking gone wrong.
He was in Moncton, I believe, and then got into a cab and said, like, take me to Miramichi, which is a long ways away.
Yeah.
So he like hijacks the cab, and then by happenstance, that's right, it was a snowstorm. So the cab driver goes off the road, and then this female RCMP officer checks to see if they're okay, and then he kidnaps both of them.
Yes.
Yeah. And then while he's paying for gas, she knows that cabbies have an extra set of keys, so they got the hell out of there.
Yes.
And then he stole a semi.
Exactly, and that's when he got busted in that. Ended up getting life without parole. So for 25 years, he's applied several times, and it has been denied every time. Thank goodness, because I have a firsthand account of how nuts he is. Because after I did the episode about him, he sent me a very eerie and creepy letter enclosed in a Christmas card, easily the eeriest Christmas card I've ever received. And I can't imagine anyone will top a Christmas blessings from Alan Leger Christmas card.
There was a lot of psychobabble in that letter.
Why do you think ChatGPT, an artificial intelligence program that's scoured the internet, why would it make Alan Leger's crimes the 5th most notorious Canadian crime?
Probably just because of how much terror he caused. Like when he was at large and living in the woods, the people of Miramichi and surrounding areas were like, they didn't even want to go into their own house.
Mm-hmm. They canceled Halloween.
They were petrified. That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was because it was so uncertain. No one knew where he was or what he was capable of.
Absolutely. Yeah, they canceled Halloween, and another thing that came of this is, since people knew he was out there and coming out of the woods every so often, people were installing the motion detection security lights, which were also new at the time. That wasn't a common thing. People would usually have a light you would just leave on all night, not like the motion lights. So the motion lights, when people started installing them in the area, people simply refer to them as Leger lights. And according to people I've spoke to in Miramichi, to this day, if you talk to some of the older residents, they'll still call them Leger lights, almost a slang word for those lights. But that's
good trivia.
Yeah, he's now an elderly nutcase, but I can't imagine he'll ever get out.
There's no way. He hasn't taken accountability for what he's done. He doesn't understand the gravity of his crimes.
Yeah, and even in the letter he sent me, he was blaming other people, denying it. He was like, it was 30 years ago. Yeah, that's what the parole board wants to hear.
Yeah, right. Yeah. For someone who's a sociopath who seemed to charm his way to escaping prison, he sure lost that charm.
But Leger being on this list, it's a heinous crime, and it's well known in the area, but it isn't one that's that mainstream. There's been a couple TV made for TV documentaries. There's a book, 2 books that off the top of my head about his story, but compared to other Canadian crimes, I'm surprised that it made it on this list. I think ChatGPT got this one right, though. But I think ChatGPT got it right, but I'm surprised it got it right because it isn't as well known as some other crimes in Canada.
That's true. It's not as well known, but I think when it was happening, it was national news because my mom remembers it. Okay. I asked my mom if she knew who he was, and she said, "Oh yeah, I remember when that was all going down." So.
And your mom would have been out west at the time?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So she would have been 30-ish.
Okay. So Alan Leger's crime was number 5. Number 4, I'll allow you to take the lead on this.
The 4th most notorious crime in Canadian history is the case of Clifford Olson. Olson was a serial killer who preyed on children and teenagers in the early 1980s. He was responsible for the murder of at least 11 young individuals in British Columbia.
Clifford Olson is the 4th most notorious crime, which I think is appropriate as well. I just recently learned about Clifford Olson, which might say something if it's, is it that notorious? But it really is. Mm-hmm. Clifford Olson killed 11 kids between November and August of 1981. So only 9 months.
Wow.
Yeah. He was like the boogeyman of BC. Actually, they call him the Beast of BC.
Like Alan
So
Leger is the monster of the Miramichi, the beast
that's
of
right.
BC. And it's around the same time, sort of, right?
Yep. And
Wow.
just like Legier, he had a rap sheet at 3 kilometers long and break and enter, stuff like that. And it escalated to sexual assaults. But I think what makes his crimes so heinous and his crimes so notorious is not only did he kill juveniles, like all of his victims were between the ages of 9 and 18. He didn't have a preference. He killed boys and girls. And he somehow even after he was apprehended, he continued to terrorize the families.
How so?
So he was finally caught. He would often sexually assault and torture his victims before ultimately killing them.
And what was this like? Because he was targeting children. What was his MO like? How was he getting these children? Do you know?
He would approach them with like a job offer.
Oh, okay.
He abducted quite a few from like around I don't know what you would call it, like an employment building or something.
Hmm.
Which I didn't know lots of teens hung around, but a
This is in the
couple were
80s.
true.
In the 80s in BC, I could see it.
A couple were abducted like from the mall right off their bicycles. He abducted one hitchhiker hitchhiking to her boyfriend's house. But yeah, he raped and strangled or bludgeoned most of them. He drowned one in a shallow puddle.
Mm.
It was just bizarre. His MO was kind of all over the place,
Mhm.
but he was finally caught on Vancouver Island on August 12th, 1981.
Mhm.
So the cops were already watching him.
Mhm.
He had broken and entered a bunch of places, and that's why they could pull him over, I think. But he was trying to pick up two underage hitchhikers. They finally arrest him. And then as he's saying, like, I didn't even do anything, when they searched him, they found a notebook with the name Judy Cosma in it. And that was one of his victims. She was
Oh.
14.
Oh.
So that was enough to arrest him.
Mhm.
They arrested him. His story unraveled. And so that was that. He was guilty. However, he made a deal with the police. He made a cash for bodies deal.
Okay, yeah, this is I only learned about this deal that he made today when reading about him. This is the craziest I've ever heard. What is the cash for body deal?
So he told police that he would give them the locations of each of the victims for 10 grand each, but he would give the 11th one up as a freebie.
Which sounds nuts, but he did it and they paid him.
Yes, all of the money, $100,000 was paid to his wife in trust. Like 81, I just said this, but 81 wasn't that long ago. How did they ever agree to that?
These sort of deals with the devil are going to come up a couple times on this list. But this is definitely a deal with the devil. But you know, when that back in that day, back in that era, or even I guess today, when you hear of these crimes where they catch the perpetrator but they can't find the victim, what's the what is the right way to handle that? Oftentimes the perpetrator continues to deny the crime, so they can't give up the body of the victim without, confessing or something. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how for him to say like, I did it, but I'm not saying anything unless you pay me. Man, I'm not like a hardcore proponent of the death penalty, but I think that's a case where like, well, we're going to kill you then.
Right.
And I guess they're not getting the bodies either if they kill them. So what's the right way to deal with that?
Well, and you want these families to have closure, and that's another way he would torment families and other people is, so when he was in jail, families with kids that were still missing would write to him and ask him if he knew anything, and he would like string them along. He would and that he would request like weird photos and for them to do weird things just to end up him like laughing in their face and being like, no, I actually don't know anything.
Wow.
Like, isn't all mail incoming and outgoing monitored? Why would they ever let that happen?
Well, I think it's
whatever.
probably,
I wasn't there.
It's probably monitored, but not for content. They're probably looking for
Oh,
like, is there drawings with like craziness or like stuff being
it
snuck in
should
and
be for
out?
content.
It should be, yeah. But
Yeah. So he applied for parole 3 times. Once was only after 15 years because he got 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for 25 years because Canada, right? But at the time, it was called a faint hope clause where you could apply for parole after 15 years of serving. Um, and they denied him in 17 minutes. And this clause was actually abolished to murderers because of him. They were like,
wow,
we really got to deal with this.
good.
So, yeah. And then he applied for parole twice, 2 more times, 2006 and 2010. And he was denied in under 30 minutes both times.
Uh,
So,
Another thing about his story is, so he got the money for revealing the bodies. He got the $100,000, but there was also a debate about him receiving money from the government while in prison.
yes, it became common knowledge in 2010 when he was 70. I don't know if he had been receiving it since he was 65, but it was like $1,100 a month, a little bit
And it
over.
was like an old age pension.
That's right. And yeah, people were just
Well,
outraged,
of course, because
obviously.
you're in prison. The government's already paying for your everything for you to be there. For them to be then giving an old age pension that he's probably just spending on like at the canteen in the prison.
Cigarettes, yeah.
Yeah, that's oh yeah yeah. But this story specifically has an end. Alan
Yes.
Legier is applying for parole and wasting everybody's time and scaring the people of Miramichi with the thought of him ever being released. Where's Clifford Olson at nowadays?
Well, back in September of 2011, Cliff kicked the bucket.
Mm,
He had terminal cancer, I guess,
mm.
and was taken to hospital and died there. Can't say I feel bad.
Yeah, I'm okay. Didn't you saying that didn't affect me.
No, not at all. Should have
Uh,
happened sooner.
his story, horrible. Someone who's preying on children, obviously horrific, and for him to want money for the bodies, and for him to screw with other people who are hopeful that he can help end their suffering and give them answers to their lost loved ones. A horrific story and a horrible series of crimes, but I'm someone who I read a lot of Canadian crime news, read books, watch documentaries. I don't know. Still don't know a lot about Clifford Olson's story. I'm surprised that ChatGPT can scour the internet and give us Clifford Olson as number 4 on this list.
I think it's because 11's a big number, and it's like SVU, particularly heinous because it involves lots of kids
Mm-hmm.
and not only murder but sexual assault
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, just like Legier, the people of British Columbia were petrified. Like the Surrey area,
Mm-hmm.
their kids weren't allowed out.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, that's all you did was play outside. Like he was a special kind of asshole.
Yeah, but this is a list of special kinds of assholes.
That's what we asked. So
Let's move on to number 3. This one, I don't even know where to begin with this story. According to ChatGPT,
The third most notorious crime in Canadian history is the case of Russell Williams. Williams was a former Canadian Forces colonel who became infamous for his crimes. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of sexual assault, and various other charges related to home invasions and thefts.
this story I think is easily one of the more high-profile crimes in this list. Aside from just how horrible his crimes are and how weird they end up being, he's also like a senior person in the Canadian military. So he's like, to a lot of people, like a bit of a star. And I will tell you, I have an aunt who is also like kind of senior in the Canadian military or Department of National Defense. And she had known him. She had met him several times at like work functions, but he was kind of like her boss's boss sort of thing. He was like
wow.
pretty high up, but she had she had showed me a photo she had with him, and she had met him multiple times. They weren't on like a first name basis, but she described to me like when people in the Department of National Defense learn that one of their top dogs is not only being like charged with murder, but it's like the most twisted, bizarre, just like unimaginably weird crime. So the short version is that Russell Williams was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of sexual assault, and 86 other charges related to home invasions and thefts that occurred between 2009 and 2010 in Ontario. So when you just hear that, that sounds bad. But when you actually hear what he did and how he was caught and what the evidence of his crimes were, it takes a whole different route. So buckle up for this one. So I'm going to kind of tell the story based on how he got caught, because I think this is one of the most fascinating pieces of Canadian crime video is the interrogation and ultimately the confession of Russell Williams. The entire thing, I believe, is available on YouTube, and CBC made a documentary based just on his interrogation. So the way it goes down is Ontario Provincial Police are investigating the disappearance of a 27-year-old woman named Jessica Lloyd. She had disappeared from her home. The evidence left behind was tire tracks on her property and they weren't just regular tire tracks. It was something unique that led them to be like, okay, these aren't regular tires, so this is a good clue. They also found boot prints in the snow on her back deck. So they had the tires and the boot prints of the person that was responsible, but they didn't really have any suspects. So what the Ontario Provincial Police decided to do is this kind of like, when they do the, I don't know what you would call it, just like they block the road and stop cars one by one, and you got to show like, I don't know, proof of insurance or something. What would you call that? Like a roadblock?
Stop check.
A stop check. They did a stop check on a stretch of highway for just about a 12-hour period on a stretch of highway near her home, near missing Jessica Lloyd's home. And what they were doing is they were doing this roadside stop check of every car that passed through. They were just saying hi to the driver and looking at the tires. They weren't telling people what they were doing, but they were peeking at tires. Just by chance, Russell Williams, who is one of the senior people at the military base in this area, he usually drove a BMW to work, but for whatever reason, twist of fate, he drove his Nissan Pathfinder to work, which wasn't a normal thing. As he went through the stop check thing, they looked at his Pathfinder and his tires, and they said like, oh crap, I think those are the tires. But they let him go, but they certainly kept note of who he is, what he was driving. They're going to follow up with him. A couple days later, they call him and they ask him to come in for questioning. Again, he's an important guy, so he's very confident. He's like, sure, I'll come down there and talk to you. So he goes to the police station. When he sits down, it's, and again, if you haven't seen the video of the interrogation, you got to watch it because he's so buddy with the cop. He's so cool. But once they start saying like, your tires are a match, he's like, whoa. And then they end up saying like, and it's not just tires, we got boot prints. Can we see your boots? And when they say like we got boot prints in the interrogation, you see Russell Williams look down at his feet to be like, oh shit. He agrees. He said like, you can take my DNA, you can take my boots, like I'll cooperate. The boots were a match. The tires were a match. And they had him and they all but said like, what are we going to do? Like, we know it's you. Like, what are we going to do here? And Russell Williams decided to confess to everything, warts and all. To his defense, it was in his defense, his confession was pretty full. And I believe the motivation was, he said multiple times, like, this is going to kill my wife when she finds out about all this. Russell Williams didn't want police like showing up at the house and turning the place upside down. And he said, like, I want to make this easy on my wife. I'm just going to tell you exactly what happened. And he explained to them that he was responsible for this crime. He explained where they would find her body. He explained where they would find evidence related to his crimes, and not only the crimes of two separate murders, one that he wasn't even suspected of. One of the people who were under him in the military had been found dead in her home, and he wasn't a suspect. He wasn't being investigated for that. He admitted to it. But one of the things that he directed them to is a spot in his home where he had saved photographs and keepsakes from his crimes. And yeah, he had his two murders, but he had a whole series of home invasions where he would break into homes, take off his clothes, and change into the underwear of the people who lived in the homes, the females, and take pictures of himself. So he had thousands of photos of himself in women's underwear, which is really weird to see a big military guy in, like, too small bras and panties. But he had directed the police to where they would find this stuff, and he pled guilty. He took full responsibility for it.
Oh my God.
Did you ever see the photos?
No,
Okay.
I can't wait I want to look up this confession and all the evidence.
What you should watch, and not all the evidence, be careful. It's twisted. But you should watch, CBC did two separate documentaries right around the same time. And one was about Russell Williams' crime. And then the other was just specifically about the interrogation and confession, because it's just amazing. But as I said, he pled guilty. He made it easy for investigators by telling them where everything was. He, not long after that, he did try to kill himself. He tried to take, I guess, maybe this wouldn't be the easy way out, but what he did in prison was he tried to kill himself by, like, he was on suicide watch. So they were paying, he was somewhere to keep him safe. But what he did was he took a roll of toilet paper, like the inner cardboard of toilet paper, and he folded it up and tried to force it down his throat. But the guards caught him and saved him, which is a pretty weird way to go.
That's like, I mean, I guess we're like desperate times, but that is just the worst method that I could think of.
Yeah, it didn't work. He ended up getting 2 life sentences to be served concurrently with no consideration for parole for 25 years. Of course, he was stripped of his rank in the military, but much like what we just talked about with Clifford Olson, Russell Williams was able to keep his military pension, which is $60,000 a year. He is still eligible for that. Apparently, in order to remove a pension, there's some kind of like parliamentary thing that needs to happen. It's very complicated to remove a military pension. For whatever reason, they didn't
Amazing
do
that murder doesn't cover that.
Yeah, there should be a clause in there. Yeah, come on. When thinking about the most notorious Canadian crimes, Russell Williams doesn't surprise me that he's on this list, because the crimes are heinous, they're bizarre. He was someone in a prominent role within Canadian culture, I guess we'll say. It's been written about all over the place. There was several documentaries and higher profile things on TV. So it's a case that if you search, crime in Canada and Google it, Russell Williams' stuff is going to pop out. I'm not surprised that it is landed on the number 3 spot, despite there only being 2 victims in this case, 2 victims of murder, like 2 people lost their life.
Well, I'm just wondering, where have I been? Because I didn't know about this guy.
Are you serious?
No, like at all. Like, this case doesn't even ring a bell with the details.
Oh man,
but
the photos of him in the lingerie are just nuts. And it's not like a couple photos, like there's like thousands and thousands of them. And some of them are like he had, like, there was pedophilia stuff happening. So some of them are like children's underwear. He has photos of himself just looking like, he's like in someone's house. So all the lights are off because he broke in. And he's just wearing that stuff, and he's just taking pictures of himself with probably like a Polaroid camera or something.
It had to have been. You can't get that developed without someone raising a red flag.
That's it. Yeah.
I
guess. I'm surprised. God. But where were you in 2009 and 2010? What were you up to that you didn't hear about this?
I was not going to class. I would have been 16, 17. So
You were in
yeah.
need of ChatGPT is what.
I was, yes. No, and like I've always been into true crime, but yeah, I don't even remember like my mom talking about it. But I think it's the most notorious because of his status.
Mm-hmm.
He was just so respected in the military or wherever.
Yeah, I'm saying
And
Department of National Defense. It should be Canadian Armed Forces. I'm so used to like the American kind of terminology, but either way,
I'm just what
shithead.
I'm wondering if he really cared about his wife or if he was just so narcissistic he didn't want to be embarrassed himself.
Yeah, that's a good point. But then there's also, if you're pleading guilty and you're taking it on the nose, you're a bit more in control of it. So could it also be a control thing? Like if you're like, I didn't do it and you got to fight them, that's different. Or if you're like, I'm just going to take the lead on this, I'm going to take, that's kind of maintains your control. But he's also like, you don't become a colonel in the Canadian Armed Forces by being like a soft, weak person. Like he was able to take it on the nose. And I think most people probably couldn't. I don't know.
Well, and he was fairly confident up until he knew that they had his boot prints. But I wonder if he was just like, if I go with the flow, if I am cooperative, I got a lot of buddies in the system. I wonder if he thought that it would help him out at one point. Maybe he really thinks he might get parole. Will he be alive in 15 years or whatever?
Probably.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for joining Madelayne and I for this episode of Nighttime. I'm going to pause the conversation at this point, but you're not going to have to wait long to hear our discussions surrounding the second and most notorious Canadian crime as decided by artificial intelligence, as that episode will be available in only 2 days after this one. So keep an eye on the podcast feed. Now, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, I want to call out to you for your stories. In the next Canadian Gothic episode, Madelayne and I will again break down a collection of your encounters with creeps. But there's still room for a few more stories. So if you ever had the displeasure of a creepy coworker, a nightmare date, a far too strange stranger, or any other type of creep encounter, please stop what you're doing now, go to nighttimepodcast.com/contact, and send us a voice memo. The voice recorder's easy to use, and if you make any mistakes or misspeak, I'll edit it before it goes to air. So don't worry, make sure we all sound our best. We both hope to hear from you. Now let me end with some thanks here. First, a big thanks to Monty Datta, who contributes to the music for this episode. A shout out to LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides the series' intro and outro voiceovers. And lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. And on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed, Ashley, Peg, and KJ. Thank you for your generous support. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, but isn't currently subscribed to the premium feed, you can help out in a variety of ways. Of course, a premium feed subscription costs only a couple dollars a month and funds the creation of the show while giving you access to an ad-free 2-day early release date with access to a full back catalog of episodes. But if you can't go premium, you can still help the show out by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting some like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to submit a question or comment for an upcoming episode, you can reach me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. I hope to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.